Automatic vocal tuning is one of the most commonly used effects in modern production, no matter what genre or style you're working with. Just like reverb, compression, EQ, it's a tool that every modern producer has probably had some experience with. At a basic level, it seems pretty obvious what it does. It takes vocals that are out of tune and makes them sound in tune. And it's also responsible for that classic robotic tuning effect. But like everything in audio, there's a bit more to the story. And if you want to truly be able to dial in your tuning like a pro, you need to first understand a little bit more about how it works. This quick video you're watching right now could save you hours and hours of struggling and fighting with your automatic tuning. It's going to give you the confidence and knowledge you need to be able to dial in any style of tuning instantly. Here's what we'll do. I'll start by simplifying how automatic tuning actually works. Then we'll talk about practically what that means, how to apply that knowledge to use it most effectively, what not to do, all of that. Then I'll show you how to control the algorithm to achieve any style of tuning that you want, whether that's completely natural and transparent or the classic robotic tuning effect. So all that said, let's get started. First, let's talk about how automatic tuners actually work. Now don't worry, we're not going to get too technical here. I'm going to simplify it down to its core concepts because as a mixer or engineer or producer, this is what's really important to understand. Automatic tuners essentially do three things. The first thing they do is detect the pitch of the incoming signal. This is so it knows what the pitch currently is. Then they analyze that pitch and compare it to the notes that are in the key of the song. And third, they shift the pitch to whatever the closest correct note is. And they shift it by however far away that note is. So let's run an example through it to better understand it. Let's say you sing a D, but it's 30 cents flat. Our automatic tuner is first going to analyze that you're singing a D and that it's 30 cents flat. Then it's going to compare it to all the notes in the key of the song. Let's say the song is in the key of C. So the closest correct note is D. Then the automatic tuner is going to say, well, it should be a D, but it's 30 cents flat. So we'll shift the note up by 30 cents so that the singer sounds like they're singing a perfect D. That's essentially what it's doing many times per second and making those micro adjustments until your vocals sound in tune. So why do we need to know this? Well, first off, it makes it much easier to understand where we need to place our tuner in our chain. Think about this. Imagine if you put a reverb on your vocal and then you put your automatic tuner after it. The reverb is going to be ringing out all the different notes that you sang. So even if you're singing an E, but you just sang a D, some of that D is still going to be ringing out in the reverb tail. This is a big problem for automatic tuners because they don't know which note you're actually trying to sing. They're seeing both notes and it's probably going to end up fluttering back and forth between those notes. So it's obvious with reverb and delay, but it can also happen if you're doing something to change the harmonic structure of your signal. If you're introducing a bunch of overtones or you're changing the relationship between the harmonics and the fundamentals, this can cause the tuner to have a tough time deciding what that incoming signal is. And remember, that's the first thing it's doing. It's trying to detect the incoming pitch. Now, there's a common misconception that you might be able to clean up the signal before it gets into the tuner, but this really has no benefit and it might end up doing more harm than good. See, within the detection circuit of an automatic tuner, it's already doing a ton of pre-processing to the signal. And it's doing all the pre-processing and manipulation that it needs to do to be able to detect the note from a raw vocal. So generally speaking, whatever you're doing before that isn't really going to have an effect and it might actually have a negative impact. So if you're using an automatic tuner, place it first in your chain for best results. So now let's talk about the ways we can control the algorithm of an automatic tuner, because this is how you can get different effects with it, from completely natural and transparent all the way to the robotic tuning effect. I've got X-Pitch loaded up on this vocal and we can see there are three primary tuning controls. And one of the reasons I love using X-Pitch is because it boils down this very complex algorithm into these very intuitive controls that allow you to get any sound you want. So we're actually going to start with the strength knob. So you remember how the algorithm shifts the pitch by however far away it is from the correct note, right? So if we sing a note 30 cents flat, it's going to shift that note up 30 cents so that it's in tune. Well, with X-Pitch, we can actually control the strength of how much tuning is applied. So when we have the strength set to 100% like this, it's going to tune it perfectly to the note center. So if it's 30 cents flat, it's going to tune it up 30 cents. If it's 50 cents flat, it's going to tune it up 50 cents. But if we set this strength down to 50%, for example, then it's only going to tune it 50% of the way to the right note. So for example, if we're 30 cents flat and we have it set to 50% on the strength knob, it's only going to tune it 15 cents closer, right? Half of the way there. And what this means is you can maintain a lot more of the human variation in your vocal while still tuning it as much as you want. Now, generally speaking, this is going to produce a much more natural result. It's really important if you want the hardest, most robotic tuning effect to leave the strength at 100%. Most other tuners don't have this control available. It'll always be 100% strength, but it's one of the reasons why X-Pitch can sound much more natural at a lower strength, or the same classic robotic tuning effect at 100%. So let's move on to setting the key and scale. Remember step 2 of how an automatic tuner actually works. It's analyzing the incoming signal and then comparing it to whatever the closest correct note is. Well, in order for the tuner to know what the correct note should be, we have to tell it what are all the notes that are in the key and scale of the song we're singing. And to set this in X-Pitch, we can simply hover over here, select the note and the scale, and we can see it sets it to the right scale. This particular song is in B minor, but I'm going to show you a trick in case you don't know what the key and scale of your song is. If we click quantum key and then play through our song, it's going to light up with all the notes that it detects. So let's try it out a little bit here.
I need you one last time. I'm just killing time waiting for the sickness to take me away.
So these are all the notes that it detected, and we can test it out with the tone playback while we're listening to it.
Need you one last time.
And if a note isn't detected yet, but we know it's in the scale or in the song later, we can simply add it like that. Or if there's a note that's detected that shouldn't be in, we can remove it like that. But once we get all of the notes detected and we can confirm it by ear, we can simply hit lock scale and it sets the custom scale. Now you'll notice this is exactly the B minor scale. We ended up singing all those notes in that short amount of time there. Now the reason I like using quantum key is it's much more precise and accurate when it comes to the notes that you're actually singing and wanting to tune to. It's a much more hands-on and musical way of figuring out what the notes are. Sometimes if you're using a tool that just kind of guesses what the beat key is, it might guess wrong and it can cause a lot more confusion down the line when your tuner isn't working correctly. Here with X-Pitch, it'll detect the notes that you're actually singing. You can set it by ear with these buttons here, and it's just a very precise way to know these are all the notes I'm singing, this is what it should be tuning for. So this takes care of controlling step 2, knowing which notes we need to tune to. Okay, let's move on to the transition knob. Now this is arguably one of the most powerful controls we have over the algorithm, and it has one of the biggest impacts on the sound. See, if you think about step 3 of how the automatic tuner works, when it changes from one note to another, we can control how quickly or how slowly those notes transition. And when you have extremely fast transitions, you get this unnatural artifact, and that is the classic robotic tuning effect. Take a listen to what happens when we set this really fast transition.
I need you one last time. I'm just killing time waiting for the sickness to take me away.
So you hear how when we set it to 0 milliseconds, we get that classic hard tuning effect. But as we back off the transition, it suddenly gets a lot more natural sounding. That's because with this fast transition, it's snapping from one note to the next in a very unnatural way. But it produces this pretty cool effect. A more natural setting of 40 milliseconds, for example, isn't going to be as obvious to our ears that anything's happening. It's going to just sound very natural.
I need you.
So here's the guidelines I think about when I'm setting transition speed. If I want the classic robotic tuning effect, I'll go for 0 to 3 milliseconds, anything really fast like this. If I want kind of a modern pop style tuning, I'll go for somewhere between 10 to 15 milliseconds, maybe 20. And then if I want something that sounds very natural and transparent, like I can't tell it's tuning at all, I'll usually go for 30 to 40 milliseconds. Now the sustain is kind of connected to the transition in a way. And what it does is adjusts that speed over time on long notes. So if we push this sustain up, it's going to increase the transition speed on long notes. And it's really helpful if you have these long notes where you want the vibrato of the singer to kind of shine through more. You can push up the sustain on a long note, you can have a little bit of a faster transition, but it's not going to kill the vibrato or the natural variation over that note. At the same time, if you pull the sustain down, it's going to allow you to get a tighter sustain. It's going to allow that transition to get faster over the course of these long notes. Most of the time, I leave sustain at 0. I only really touch it when I have a reason to. For example, if I've got a lot of vibrato and I just want that to kind of shine through a little bit more, I'll push it up. So now that we've gone through and we understand how these controls are actually controlling the algorithm, let's talk about a few of my favorite recipes. These are the settings that I would go to achieve any style of tuning. For that classic robotic effect, I'm going to set transition all the way up to 0, sustain at 0, and then strength at 100%. I'm also going to make sure always that I have the correct key and scale set, and this is going to get that robotic effect.
I need you one last time.
For a more modern pop tuning, I'm going to set the transition somewhere between 10 and 15 milliseconds. I'll leave sustain at 0 as well, and then strength sometimes between 95 and 100%.
I need you one last time.
So you can tell it's not quite robotic sounding, but it is just a nice, tight, modern tuning. Now for transparent, completely natural, like you can't even tell it's being tuned, but it is kind of helping the tune out, I'll generally set the transition somewhere in the 30 to 40 millisecond range. I might play around with sustain if I need to, and then strength, I might go anywhere from 70 to 100%, but generally somewhere in here in the 80% range.
I need you one last time. I'm just killing time, waiting for the sickness to take me away.
And you can tell it's just completely natural, transparent. Of course, I can go slower if I'm hearing any kind of transition effect that I don't want. I can always go slower. I can always use less strength. And that's one of the great things about X-Pitch is you have full control over it. You can slam it and get that robotic effect, or you can back it way off to the point where it's barely doing anything, just kind of touching in the tuning a little bit. So those are my go-to settings, and that's an overview of automatic tuning and what every producer should know about it. Because if you understand how it works, it's very easy to dial in, it makes complete sense, and you can simply just dial it in very quickly on the spot without needing to fiddle around with it and play guess and check. I hope you learned something from this. If you enjoyed this type of video, give it a like, subscribe for more tutorials like this, and as always, happy mixing.